get started. So, Christine, why don't you kick this thing off?
All right. I just want to welcome everyone to taking the time to join us today with Hillary Thayer. And here we go. Welcome to today's webinar, My Leadership Journey with Hillary Thayer, Director of Library Services of the Monterey County Free Libraries and current President of the California Library Association. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Developing Leaders in California Libraries program, a program of the California Library Association that is supported by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, administered in California by the state librarian. Before we get started, I just would like to remind you that you should be on mute. As a member of our audience, if you have any questions, we encourage you to use the chat box, as Robert had mentioned. Be sure to select, if you just want to share it with the panelists, there's an option for that, but we also encourage you to share it with the audience as well. You can also use the Q&A box at the bottom. And also we have allowed time at the end of the webinar for questions. At the end of the webinar, you will be prompted to fill out a survey. We highly encourage you to participate in the feedback. And just as you know, this will be is recorded, and will be posted to the Developing Leaders website. And with that, I hand it over to Robert.
Well, thank you very much, Christine, and welcome, Hillary. Thank you for joining us today.
That's my pleasure.
And I mean, a real quick overview of what we're planning to talk about, but these conversations could kind of go anywhere that they go, but we're going to talk a little bit about just Hillary's journey and how she's gotten from where she was to where she is today. We actually have something professionally in common as far as teaching at the UCLA grad school, so I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe library education. We're going to talk a little bit about the decision to actually leave a job. It's something that, at least with the cohort, it's a common question. Why would you leave a job that you're good at and you've been doing? We're going to talk about advice for leadership in crisis. Obviously, it just seems relevant. We're going to talk about the CLA conference, a little bit about the thought process to actually postpone the 2020 conference. We're going to ask Hillary about something she's seen in California libraries that they're doing now that she's been impressed with. And actually, I was talking to her before we went on the air, and I talked a little bit maybe about what they're doing up in Monterey County, because I thought it sounded really good. And, we'll talk about whatever else might come up. So that sound good to you, Hillary?
Yep, all works.
Okay, just a real quick bio. Hillary grew up in LA and started working in her public library at the age of 15. Wow. She got her BA at UC Santa Cruz and then went directly to library school at UCLA. And actually, while she was working, she also went back and she received her MPA from Cal State Long Beach. And let me get a list of all the places Hillary has worked at. Beverly Hills, Sacramento, Folsom, Palos Verdes, Torrance, and now Monterey County. And in addition to that, she served on the board of CALIFA, the Southern California Library Cooperative. And right now she is the CLA President. She has taught some info people courses. She's taught for the city of Torrance. And she did teach the public libraries class at UCLA. So with that, let's get started. And the first question I'd like to start with all of my guests is just basically, how do we know each other? Because people ask me, well, you seem to know a lot of people, Robert. So, but how these relationships happen, I don't know. They just kind of happen. And I think I remember when I first met you, but what's your recollection?
Oh, you're going to love this. I don't remember.
Okay.
To me, when I started being interested in how do I give back to my profession as I grow myself, because I've always felt that it was my responsibility to somehow give back to our profession, whether that was by writing book reviews for a journal or doing a workshop at CLA or presenting in another context. I've always felt that I should be giving back in some way, being a mentor, hosting an intern. And at the time I thought, well, could I be a board member? Could I represent an association, an organization? I don't even remember. I sort of felt like you and Michelle Pereira were always there. Like you were always a presence in meetings where if I was sitting as part of a group, you were going to get up and say something that I wanted to write down, that was profound, that inspired me. But I honestly don't remember. Is that horrible?
Oh, no, I mean, I can't put my exact finger on when it is I first met you. I do know that we got a chance to get to know each other a little bit better when we did the Staff Innovation Fund program. I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, and Torrance was a participant. And so we got a chance to probably go out to Torrance, I'm going to say 5 or 6 different times. And I get to know your staff, but also get to know you. And the one thing that I remember from that really impressed me is that you would actually, for example, work on the reference desk, work on the circulation desk to make sure that your staff was free and they didn't have to worry about covering a desk while the trainings were going on. And I thought, well, that's good. Would all directors do that? I don't know. Would I have done that? Probably not, but I would have found someone else to do it for me. But no, I just was very impressed that you were willing to get on a public service desk so your staff can do other things.
I think that sometimes what I've tried to do is say, sometimes the best way for me to help is not the most obvious way. And to say, okay, what's in the way of my staff accomplishing this goal, whether it's participating in a workshop or doing a train. And sometimes what's in the way is time. And I go, okay, well, what's the best way to free up time? And sometimes saying, okay, I'll take 2 desk hours, go, is the easiest, best, most applicable, immediate way to free up time. And then it was always sort of fun working the desk. And sometimes people who knew who I was would come up and go, why are you on the desk? I'm like, I'm still a librarian. My master's degree didn't go away. I could still answer reference questions. So it was always a little enjoyable for me too.
Actually do some work, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, let's talk about your leadership journey and just, you started working at the age of 15 in a library, and how'd you get to where you are now?
Well, the starting to work in the library actually came from my mother, who was a librarian. And I'd been casting about for a summer job, and I didn't like being outdoors. I was an incredible klutz. I wasn't going to go do other obvious things. And it was my mother who said, walk up to the library and see if they're hiring. I think you might enjoy that. And I changed tactics in college. I went to college thinking I was going to be a teacher, but I kept working at the library. And about midway through college said, well, I want to do what they're doing. And that's why I was able to go straight to library school, because I was really like, I want to go do that. I want to go do what I see those librarians doing. I think that's great. And they were very willing, and this was at Beverly Hills Public, very willing to just let me try stuff. And to me, that was huge. They were like, you want to try working on the summer reading desk? All right, let's go. You want to try doing a story time? All right, let's go. And that's why I ended up in libraries. And then at each step, I would see the next step. Well, I want to try what they're doing. So as a children's librarian, I worked with branch managers and went, I want to try what they're doing. And then as a branch manager, I worked with a public services director who was awesome and said, well, I want to try what she's doing. And it never was an aspiration to work in administration from the get up. It was more that I could see that next layer of work and get excited about it and see the impact it had, and then feel like I could do that. But it was always like step, step, step. It wasn't, I want to be a library director someday. And at each step I went, okay, I'm home. This is it. But then I would see, okay, but if I could develop a strategic plan, if I could have influence on the budget, if I could work on advocacy, wouldn't that be exciting? And that just meant step up. So it was bit by bit.
So you never aspired to be a director then?
No, no, I was public services manager for Torrance for 6 years, and I was in charge of branches and children's and outreach programming volunteers. That was my sweet spot, was
Hmm.
everywhere I had come from. I loved it. And the director I worked with at the time, Paula Weiner, was getting ready to retire, and she spent about 3 years telling me I could do it and handing me assignments and bringing me with her to meetings and basically putting work on my desk to say, I want you to lead this project. I want you to draft this thing. And I was just like, yeah, Paula, whatever, I'm happy. And then when she retired, they had to have a temporary appointment. And this was at the end of 2010. So we had just cut the budget twice. So 2 budget cuts. She left in December. I said, I'll do acting. Acting, I can apply, I cannot apply, I could not get the job. It's okay, I love my job. January, we had to cut the budget again and then prepare to cut it again in May. And I did that 6 months really working for the organization and simultaneously applying for the job. And I kind of said, I could get it, I could not get it. I love my job. If I don't get it, it's not the end of the world. And that's kind of the attitude I went in with, is not, I have to be the library director or I can't work here anymore or the world's going to fall apart. And in the interviews, in the panel interviews, one of the directors who was doing the interviews said, you're the only internal candidate. How are you going to feel if you don't get the job? And I said, I love my job. As long as I can look over that person's shoulder and see where they're going, I'll be fine. And then when they offered me the job, I'd done it for 6 months and I was very excited to get it. But right up until I did that final interview, I was fine. Didn't have to be the director. I think more just not, I have to believe in leadership. I have to know where they're going and kind of say, okay, I can see why the library needs to end up there. Sorry, I'm pointing at the camera and realizing how that looks. But I talk with my hands. It's one of the things I do. That's more for me. If I can look over a leader's shoulder and go, okay, I get it. I get where we're going. I can go with you there. Then it's not a matter of being a certain title for me.
Okay, and I mean, on your resume, I noticed that you did teach at UCLA, like I did.
Mm-hmm.
What was the one thing that you tried to instill in your students?
The course I taught was the public libraries elective. So it was an elective course, and these were students coming who had their core courses by and large. They were either at the end of their first year or starting their second, somewhere in their second. And the one thing I tried to instill is that you're going to need to bring your core learning with you, your core learning you did in library school, but your work on the ground is going to change under your feet. And you are going to need to have the skills to be prepared to cope with that. So whether it's your public's needs change, your resources change, the priorities of the organization changes, the direction you're given changes, you're going to need the flexibility to cope with that. And that for me is, I tried to bring them my perspective of me as an employer of public librarians, to say that flexibility, that ability to think on your feet, the ability to bring your professionalism to a unique situation is critical job skills. And I tried to structure the course to prepare them for that.
All right, I'm going to ask a question of everyone in the audience who went to library school. What's the one thing you wished you learned in library school that you did not? And, you know, I'll ask you the same thing, Hillary, because you know what people need to do once they actually start working. But I mean, how did you try to prepare them for that?
I think one thing I didn't learn in library school that was almost immediately required in work is when you've brought your whole professional self to bear, you've planned something, you've set a stage, and the person who is in charge of it just says, no, I don't want to do that. And and to me, that's a twofold thing. Not only coping with a different change in direction, especially if you don't understand it, but also that managing up element that you have to be able, as a librarian, as an employee, to manage that conversation with a higher level person. You know, how do you manage up? How do you get out of that conversation the information you need to retool your thoughts and your ideas, or, you know, to not just blindly go, okay, whatever, and give up and sit down. Managing up and then coping with that when you and your supervisor or your boss or your organization don't strategically agree. We didn't cover that.
We got some good things in there. How to make a face mask. Yeah, I didn't learn that either. Customer service, all the soft skills. Yeah, politics.
Oh,
Budgeting,
politics, yeah.
dealing with people. Yeah, angry patrons. Grant writing, sure. Yeah, a lot of customer service, advocacy, customer service. Is it like partnerships and cross-departmental collaborations, budgeting. Yeah, the 21st century librarian, meeting facilitation, supervision, basics. I thought HR would be something else too that I wish I learned, but there are some good things here. And actually, I'm actually going to keep this chat and just see what maybe, you know, more, for example, the leadership program could be doing and address some of these issues.
I think that a lot of our learning in library school, at least when I went to library school, which was 92 to 94. Yes, I'm going to turn, what am I going to turn this year? I'm going to turn 50 this year. So and I went straight from college. So we were learning what I felt like we were learning the profession in a box. And it was the classes I remember the most are the ones that took that box and planted it in the real world. Because then I could see, okay, you know, you got to learn your core skills, but then let's plant them in the real world. Let's have you learn how to structure an early literacy story time. Then guess what? You have to go out and find a group of kids and actually do it. And then come back with that story about the kids who wouldn't pay attention. Or like my first story time I ever did by myself, I had structured by myself. I was doing my internship. In the middle of the second story, a kid in the front row threw up on his sister. Like, and that's the kind of thing, like, they don't teach you how to like maintain your poise during that, how to not lose the audience. That's the kind of real world skills that if we can help people with outside of library school, that would be great.
I did, there was a couple questions that came in the chat. I wrote them down and I'm going to ask you them probably a little bit later on.
Okay.
I think a couple of them are very interesting, but kind of a different kind of question. So if you weren't a librarian, what would you want to be doing? You mentioned teacher, but no, that don't count. Give me something else.
You know, now I don't want to teach. I, at least not full time, teach occasionally. I think, and a lot of this was going and getting my MPA and then working with a city government, you know, more in the government, is I would go work in public transportation, because transportation is the locking key to so many other things. And we see it in the library. We know how many people in the library we could be serving if we could get to them or they could get to us. And that's the missing piece. And that's why we have bookmobiles, and that's why we have library by mail, and but that missing piece is key to, it's key to health outcomes. It's key to socialization. So if you told me I could never work in the public library profession again, to me, I could bring the same skills to bear and bring passion to go figure out things like public transportation and paratransit and senior transit and taxi coupons, somewhere in there. I really think that's an important part of public service.
Cool. All right, let's switch gears now, because again, in the beginning, I mentioned that you worked in quite a few different jurisdictions, but I mean, for example, when you finally got to Torrance and you were the director and you've been there for a while, and I know for a fact you were doing a very good job there. Why would you want to leave a job like that?
I think I had two simultaneous things happen, and I want to go back and just talk a little bit about a habit I have that I brought to bear on this. Is one of the habits I have is when I'm through a problem, whether it's a crisis or an organizational problem, something difficult, something where I had to untangle things, is I try to sit and write down what I learned from that. And it's usually just a piece of paper that I tuck away somewhere. And it's not formal. Sometimes I write a paragraph. Sometimes I make a list. It's just a conversation I want to have with myself. Okay, having gone through this, what did I learn for myself and then for the organization? And I had been through something as not the leader where one of the things I had written down, and it's kind of a promise to myself, and I had actually talked to a colleague about it. We made the promise to each other, is if you are in charge, if you are a leader, and you are mentally done, you need to not be there. Because we had been in that state having a leader who was mentally done, and we knew it. And it was demoralizing. It was disheartening. We kind of turned to each other. So that had been a promise. I said, okay, this is a lesson for me to learn, is when you are the leader, if you're mentally done and you just need to mark time, at least get out of the way. That's kind of like if you're like, because we have had leaders have to say, but I need to retire in 6 months, 8 months, year and a half. I get that. But then at least like get out of the way. And I was coming to a point in my life with my career, with my family, with everything going on, that I realized I was becoming that person. And it was time for me to do something different. I did not know what that was. It happened that moving to Northern California assisted in family matters as well. Simultaneously, it became possible, but a lot of it was that promise to myself that if I was going to be mentally done, I needed to protect the organization, and sometimes protecting the organization is not being there anymore. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do.
Wow, I like that. Okay, here's another question. I'm going to kind of preface this with something I'm going to try to do next week when I talk to Michelle. I was kind of trolling her social media, well, specifically her Facebook page, just to find some photos that I would show and have her say, well, what's going on in this photo? So I thought, well, maybe I can try this with Hillary. So I started Googling you, and I could basically find that you're on LinkedIn, but that's it. And can I assume that your social media footprint is confined to LinkedIn? And if that is indeed the case, would you like to talk more about that?
Sure. And I think this comes down to a few things. One is when social media was taking off, there was a presumption you're going to leap on, you're going to be totally transparent. That hasn't been me, and I didn't want to project a false me to begin with. I feel like leaders kind of need to wear their authentic skin all the time. And secondly, I did have concerns about privacy at that point. I mean, I was seeing other people get friended by people they didn't want to be friended by, but then they felt intimidated. People like bosses were going and friending employees, and then they were coming to each other going, well, I don't want my boss to, like, what do I do with this? So it was a deliberate decision that I'm not on LinkedIn, I'm not on Twitter, I am on LinkedIn, I'm not on Twitter, not on Facebook, not on Instagram, but it did lead to some pushback in the job. When I was seeking other jobs or applying for things, people would look and then presume I didn't know social media. And being that I'm turning 50 this year, they would look at, years and presume, oh, you're a Luddite, you're a curmudgeon, you're not learning anything new. And simultaneously, I had actually pushed Torrance Library onto social media. We were the first department to have a Facebook page because there was no city policy, I basically wrote the policy for the city of how we can be on Facebook. So I tried to get that out in every interview that I could, to be like, you're not going to find me on Facebook, but it doesn't mean I don't understand or know anything about it. And when, in fact, when running for CLA president, they do an ask me anything on Facebook, and I couldn't do it. And I just had to say, I'll run without it. You know, I understand that I'm missing this opportunity to talk to the members who vote for president, and I understand that. And to this point, you know, yes, I'm missing some conversations with my family that only happen on Facebook, but I talk to my family, and I don't miss it. I don't need it. I did LinkedIn because professionally I felt like I needed a LinkedIn page, but it's all professional. So
What about, like, you know, for your staff, and they ask you about social media and their presence? What do you tell them?
You know, in Monterey County, it was really well established when I came. So they've got a robust everything, and I'm super proud of it. And it's open to the public, so I don't have to be a member to go see it, which is nice. In Torrance, when people were doing that, like, should my boss friend their employees, should I accept these things? As I said, you have to be authentic to you. And if your Facebook page is authentically not your work self, don't accept your boss. like just would you invite your boss into your home for that party? Then no, just don't. And then if people felt like somebody was going to be hurt, I would offer to have that conversation for them. I was like, I can go have that conversation for you. And a lot of it, we were talking about library school and politics. What happens when it's a board member? What happens when it's a city council member? What happens when it's somebody? So I tried to help to tell people, look, I can go have that conversation with you for you. I can step in. I'm happy to do it. I got nothing to lose. They can't friend me on Facebook.
All right. Okay, we're going to start switching gears now and talk a little bit more about, since this is a leadership program, about leadership. So first question is just, you know, some advice for leadership in crisis.
I think in the moment of crisis, your fight or flight, adrenaline filled, narrow focus self is going to take over, and it needs to. Like 3 weeks ago, when we were working out how to close everything in 2 days and send staff home with whatever devices, like, that was the self that had to be there. And I turned very commanding. I turned very directing. It was just you, bam, 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 get it done, get it done, get it done. I want these, you know, and that is not my normal self, but it's what is required in the moment. So I think in that initial moment, don't beat up yourself if you turn and do things that you normally wouldn't do. Like I feel like I'm normally a consensus building, let's have a meeting, let's all air out the issues person. But in that case, we couldn't do it and shut down 15 libraries in 2 days. Like it wasn't going to happen. So then you have to work out, okay, then go back to, as I say, what is your authentic leadership skin? How are you going to go to be your authentic self? And I feel like my more authentic self is consensus building. I want to hear from everybody. I want to see how people are feeling. I want to do this stuff. So then I had to work out, okay, how am I going to get back to this way of leadership? What tools do I have? And a lot of that is acting and then telling people, I know I told my staff yesterday in an email, is I kind of said, I know I'm kind of stomping all over the org chart. You know, I'm reaching out directly to whoever can get it done. And I said, I understand I'm doing that. I apologize for doing that, but this is what's required now. So kind of owning up to the things you're going to do that are to be different, so that they make sure, okay, well, Hillary didn't suddenly turn into a monster who's going to be here for the next 10 years, you know, in this skin. So I would say understanding you're going to change, but then making other people aware that you know this, but here's what's required today. And then when you make it through a crisis, and I do have complete faith, we're going to make it through this. Libraries are going to make it through this. I know this. I have complete 110% faith on this. I go back and what did I learn from that? How do I learn from this? It's that back to that, what did I, and I've done that for a long time, just writing down your lessons, talking with someone else to say, what did I learn about me? What did I learn about my organization? How can I prepare us better? And I try to do that every time I feel like we've made it through something that was a crisis or a problem that was thorny, that we had to untangle, that we had to work through, so that all that effort like turns into tangible learning, and learning you can pass on to someone else. And those are kind of my immediate things I can think of. I'm sure that if you asked me the same question 2 weeks from now, I would have thought of something else too, because it's a process. We're going to make it through.
Okay, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and let's talk about maybe one reason why a lot of people wanted to check in today is the decision to postpone the 2020 conference. And I mean, what happened in the room where it happened? What was the discussion like, and how did they finally say, okay, we're going to postpone it now?
Well, it started with staff and me conversations because, and Robert, you'll know this, and we have many former CLA presidents, and we have former and current CLA board on your call on this webinar right now, is conference has a long lead up with many business partners, and there's deadlines all along the way. And for things like the convention center, the hotel rooms, meals, you know, there's deadlines at which you start paying penalties if you make a change. So it started with the conversation that I had with our business manager to say, I need a timeline of our points and the penalties if we don't change conference. And she started working on, like, you cross this date, then you move hotel rooms, you pay this much in penalty if we decide. So it started as a real logistical discussion. Then we were watching the world. We watched ALA cancel. That was huge. We watched other conferences, like, are you going to cancel? Are you not going to cancel? Now, there's October conferences still going on, but we had a pretty early, pretty significant penalty. So then we had to decide, and I had to convene an executive committee meeting and an emergency board meeting. Like, we had to decide, and we had to decide before this deadline, otherwise it was an automatic penalty. Like, we weren't going to have any wiggle room to even negotiate out of that penalty. And in the days leading up to the board meeting, I will tell you, I had moments of, we absolutely are going to have a conference in October. It's absolutely the right thing to do. This is crystal clear to me. And then I would have a moment of, we absolutely are going to cancel conference completely. It's absolutely the right thing, you know, and everything in between. One of the things, I tend to be a plan for the worst kind of person. I'm more comfortable with contingency plans. I always want to know I can cope if the worst happens. So I sat and thought, what is we go ahead in October, what is the worst thing that could happen if we say we're going through with an October conference? And it's not that the virus would not allow people to come. That's actually not the worst thing. It's that nobody would come. Like, that's actually worse. Then I said, okay, we moved the conference to May. What is the worst thing that could happen? And then just thinking through all parameters, we had a one-item emergency board meeting. The board had a robust discussion with all the data on the table, but I laid out to the board, we need to leave this meeting having decided this today. And the board decided to move the conference to May. And we picked May based on availability of the convention center. So some people ask, why did you pick May? I'm like, well, because that's when the convention center was available. So it was data combined with just thinking through this for the future of CLA for the best things for the organization.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally understand I think the decisions you need to make, just because I think a lot of people know it, but they don't totally get how significantly the conference affects the finances of CLA, because basically that's where all the 90% of the
Yeah.
income to operate the organization comes from. And if the conference doesn't happen, there's no money coming in. So, you know, if you canceled it twice, you know, personally speaking, CLA could, you know, literally go away because there is no more money to run it. But, you know, well, I don't think that's going to happen either. But I guess the second question that people are going to ask you, okay, we're having a conference in May of 2021. Is there also going to be a conference in November or October of the same year? Or can you answer that right now?
That's the next decision the board has to make. We were not up against a deadline to make that right away. However, we are going to need to make that decision. Having two conferences in the same calendar year does do things like vendors, who also are a huge swath of the conference income, is all of our vendors who buy exhibit space. Some of them have said, we're not coming to California twice in the same year. Having two conferences in the same year may turn it into a Southern California conference and a Northern California conference? At which point do we have enough people coming to either conference to make that conference profitable? That's the next decision the board is going to have to make. Each decision pushes other decisions to the table. For example, when we decided not to have an October conference, we pushed conference. We immediately hit a problem with the bylaws about turning the offices, because you turn over the offices, president, vice president, at conference. If there's no conference in the current bylaws, there's no way to turn the offices. And so
hey, you need to be president for another 6 months.
Well, I would like Jonty to have her full year as president. So we so now CLA is the CLA board at their next meeting. I'm bringing back a proposal to bring to the membership a bylaws amendment so that the offices will turn without a conference. That means vote of the membership so everything spawns just all these other decisions. So the board still has to decide about Sacramento, and then what does that mean? You know, do we just push? Are we a spring conference from here on out? Do we just go push? Do we have two conferences in 1 year, take the hit, and then we're back on the fall schedule? The board still has to decide about Sacramento. Yeah.
Interesting. And I wish you, you know, the best of luck making that decision, but I'm also very confident that whatever it is, you guys are going to do the right thing, just because I think there's good leadership in place. So,
well, that the board is working really, really hard, considering everything. I'm so happy we have our board leadership in place. They all really put their full professional minds to bear on this. So,
and hopefully you're not regretting running for CLA president right now.
Michelle and I are going to have a conversation, because this was not what she talked to me about when she talked to me about running. Just Michelle and I, you know, over wine at the next in-person conference, Michelle and I are going to have a conversation.
Okay, well, let's move on now to, you know, it's kind of related to being the CLA president too, but just talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen that are happening in libraries in California that have, you know, really impressed you. And I know before we started talking, actually, you were telling me about what's going up in Monterey County that I thought was, wow, that's good. But, you know, so what's going on around the state that you've seen that has impressed you? And I'm going to ask the audience too for the same question, just some things that you've seen either in your own library or maybe what some other libraries have been doing now that have really just been impressive and just showing just how resilient public libraries or libraries in general can be. Go, Hillary.
All right. Well, I think I'll tell you about a little project we have here in Monterey County. It was the idea of staff. Once we closed, I had the members of our makerspace team write to me and go, you know, we have 2 3D printers sitting in libraries and they can print masks if we can figure out how to do it. And simultaneously, I have an army of sewers. I have lots of people who sew who called to me and said, can we sew masks on work time? So I got permission for the sewers. We moved the 3D printers to the logistics warehouse where the county staff is already working. So we didn't have to staff another building. And we are printing 3D masks for the hospital, for the police departments. We're sewing masks for the jail. We're making non-sew masks and giving them away to county employees and other agencies. We just partnered with Salinas Public Library. They had, I think, 1 or 2 3D printers. They did not have the staff in Salinas to staff them, but we got the county to go get their printers. So now we have 2 more printers running and printing masks. In addition, because I have this work available, for my employees who don't have the connectivity or the devices at home to do library work from home, because a lot of our library work, we're open online. You need devices, you need, robust connectivity, is if they're able to travel, they can go work and print and sew and assemble masks. And the logistics warehouse has enough space that they can social distance. They have the support of the county. So we are printing. They send me a production report every day. And yesterday I got the production report of the distribution of, they handed over a box and then took a picture of like Soledad Police Department accepting their box of masks. And really, and the team seems to be having fun. They're bonding. And I was able to say, if you can drive to Salinas, I can provide you work on work time versus having to go on leave or anything else. I think that there's many people 3D printing and sewing. I know library staff are answering 211 lines in some county, because as you can imagine, 211 is overwhelmed. I mean, how many people need services? They need referrals to food. They need referrals to, how do I get help with paperwork? I know library staff is answering phone lines for other people. I know library staff is staffing other counters and other places. They're staffing housing there. So I just think we are showing that the library is so diverse in our skills and so flexible and able to turn on a dime and just get stuff done. And I just think we're going to have more and more stories like this. I bet libraries are too busy doing to even tell anyone what they're doing right now, but these stories are going to come out.
I'm starting, a few people are putting things into the chat box. Delivery drivers are making deliveries for the county. That's good. I mean, there's a lot of things that libraries can do. Now, I know when I talk to Michelle next week too, because I live in Pasadena, so I know what some staff here are doing that, have, I'm not gonna say they don't have anything to do with the library function, but yeah, they're providing a very vital service. And the other thing that I realize now is that if I were a decision maker, like a city manager, and I see library staff, working in the warehouse or delivering things or working in the EOC, I'm going to remember that, because that's, you're just bringing more added value to what a library is. That's really outside of the traditional role that libraries are, supposed to do. But now we can do anything we want.
I think in relation to politics, like we were talking about earlier, that you don't learn this in library school, this is part of leadership, is that level of politics of, you got to be the one bragging. Like, you got to be the one putting your library story out there, whatever it is. And it's easy, because when we started printing masks, the county wanted to do a press release and a story. And I said, sure. And then they wanted me to work on it. And half of me, because I was so busy doing library stuff, I had this moment of, I don't have time for this. But then I went, but this is my job. Like, this is about the library. This is about positioning the library. So I made the time, and it resulted in having media conversations, doing interviews for newspapers. Our project ended up getting mentioned in the American Libraries newsletter, which let me send it back to the county to say, here's your county. And I don't say my library, I say your county. getting national attention for what you're doing. That makes everybody feel good. And to me, that is part of my job, is to be that person that says, I know you're busy doing, but I need you to make the time to take 4 photographs and send me a paragraph so I can issue a press release. And it's not a waste of time to be doing that right now, because like you said, Robert, if you're a city manager, if you're a city council member, if you're a board of supervisors member, these things are going to resonate come budget time. They're going to resonate come staffing cuts. And you need to be out there in the front, not playing the defensive end on the back. We need those stories, and it's our job to push them out there.
I saw something in the chat. I think that's a good idea. I don't even know when National Library Week is anymore, but
It's
again,
next week.
Okay, again, this is an opportunity to tell your story. And I mean, it's National Library Week, so maybe that's kind of a built-in excuse, but you know, even if it wasn't National Library Week, well then, yeah, it sounds like there are people out there doing some great things. So, you know, keep doing those great things, but on the other hand, to let people know that you're doing it.
And I think don't feel that it's shameful. I don't know what it is about our profession that sometimes we feel it's shameful to brag. And I'm just like, well, okay, I'm the bragger in chief. You send me the tools, I will do the bragging. It is not a problem. And we send each other stuff that we should be sending out into the world. So I get these great photos from my production team in the warehouse, and every few days I send 1 or 2 to our county's public information officer to say, if you want to use them in a Facebook post, hey, here's something to share, you know, and that's not a problem. To me, that should be what we're doing.
Right, I 100%, 110%, totally agree with you there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one question now that it's one of the favorite questions that people who come to these webinars like for me to ask. And so we're starting to wind down, but I'm going to ask you like maybe 2 more questions. But
Okay.
Here's one of them. It's just, what's like the biggest mistake you've ever made on the job? And you know, what the fallout, the outcome, and what did you learn from it?
I think my big mistakes have all been people-based, either underestimating people or trying to take a shortcut around people. And one of the biggest ones I made was I was having a significant professional disagreement with a large portion of my staff. Like we were significantly divided on a professional issue. And it had gone on for a while. And I had a moment of, I'm done with this. I had a moment, and I should always be aware of these moments. I had a moment where I landed in the place of, I'm in charge and they're not. Which is, to me, that's like a bad place to land in, where that's my only argument to myself is, it's going to be my way because I'm in charge and they're not. That's, if I try to, one of the things I learned from this is, if that's what I'm saying to myself, it's time to check myself and sit down and not do anything, because doing something in that moment is where I make my mistakes. And I did something in that moment with that attitude. And I had a really horrible day, because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had made a mistake. And then I had to go fix it in a way that I didn't say they were right, but I had to get back to, I am still willing to listen to you, and I understand you have professional validity in your opinion, without caving and saying, okay, you're right, we're going to do it your way, because I still didn't want to do it their way. And I think that will happen, and it does happen, where as a leader, I'm just professionally not in line with a huge portion of my staff. We just professionally disagree, and neither of us is wrong, but I can't take the organization in a direction that they want to go. And I think part of that, what I would do differently today, well, untangling it involved personal conversations with a lot of people. One-on-one, I took people to coffee. I said, let's go off site and talk about this. I didn't handle that well. I want to be clearer. I want to listen more. and then owning up to the organization and saying, so how do you recommend we reopen this? Because I'm willing for it to be reopened, but I still don't agree with you. So it cost time. I don't know if people ever, some people probably never came back to thinking I was actually listening to them because I had reacted in that way. I think what I learned is if that's my mindset, I'm the boss, they are not, therefore we're not, that I just got to get away from the keyboard and the phone and like not talk, because I can't trust myself in that moment. I need to work through that before I communicate some more.
I mean, thank you for sharing that. I think the takeaway too is for people out there that, I mean, our library leaders make mistakes. They're willing to own up to it. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that the walls are going to come crashing down on you because you make a mistake, because as long as you learn from it, Hillary obviously did, well then, you know, you got to just move on, right?
I think that, you know, I read articles about libraries that end up in trouble, or they end up in the press, or they end up with the library director resigning, or there's a vote of no confidence. And you never know the whole thing. Like if you're reading an article in a newspaper, you never know the whole story. You're not going to know the whole story. But I always want to read through those and go, okay, what do I think happened here? And there was a case, and I can't remember the library, I'm so ashamed, where yes, they had things happen. They had had some financial things happen. They had had some regulatory things happen. And instead of the director resigning, the director did a full statement. Here's what we found. Here's what we're doing to fix it. Here's what we're learning from it. Here's what we're putting into place. And I'm staying here until it is fixed. And I went, I admire that person, because that is the total own up. And this was in public. I read about it in another state. So this has to have been horrible and embarrassing. And I went, that is leadership I admire right there.
Okay, well, I've got one more question for you, but before I do, I was just looking through the chat about like the idea of what are we going to do once this COVID thing is behind us, as far as the story that libraries can tell. And it sounds like, yeah, hopefully the state library or CLA will take the initiative to start compiling some of these stories. And I've got the chat here, so I see people that may be willing to work on a task force, but I will be talking probably to some people at the state library, for example, too, to say, well, are you willing to get behind this? And we'll see where it goes. But yeah, it's not something that we think is just a good idea. It's something that needs to be acted upon. So let's see what happens with that. Okay, your last question, fun question. Favorite book, movie, music, and food. Go.
Okay, book, Fellowship of the Ring, J.R.R. Tolkien. Hands down, if I could only read one book for the rest of my life, it's the starting of the journey. It's the forming of the fellowship. Everything happens in it. Favorite book, hands down. Movie, depends kind of what mood I'm in. At the moment, I am watching The Martian, the Matt Damon movie. And again, it's a crisis, right? It's a survival type crisis. It's really speaking to me at the moment. I teach some workshops using The Martian, using scenes from The Martian, because I think it really speaks to me. So that's my movie. Music, you know, honestly, I'm listening to music from my childhood, a lot of folk music, Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. And sometimes I listen to that music and go, okay, yeah, people have been through really hard times, and it's created by the people, kind of out of the culture. And that's my family's background. So it speaks to family, and folk songs I would sing in the car as a kid, you know, were Woody Guthrie songs. I sang Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger songs when I did story times when I was a children's librarian. So that's kind of my overall favorite music. Food, Hershey's Kisses are my desk food right now. My husband went to the grocery store, which is now an adventure, and I held up my bag of Hershey's Kisses and said, need more Hershey's Kisses, get me. That is like my desk food, is Hershey's Kisses. So that's me at the moment.
All right, sounds good. Oh, Michelle put in a comment about favorite book, No, Michael Connolly?
He's my
What's up with that?
favorite author.
Oh,
He
okay.
like hands down favorite author, but I don't know that I could pick one book because probably the best Michael Connolly book is actually a really depressing one. So I don't know that I would read it right now. Yeah, he's my
Okay.
favorite author.
All right. Well, I've written down a few questions, and a couple came in through the Q&A as well. So we're going to ask you that, and if anyone else has other questions, get it in real quick.
Okay.
Because we're starting to butt up against the time. But real quick, in like 1 minute, what's your advice for managing up, and how do you work with, your bosses, and advice for doing that?
I think the first advice is try to figure out what they need and what they want to happen from their perspective. What's really important to you may be a dust mote in their universe, and what they want is for it to go away. Or through what lens are they looking at the library? Go in trying to see things through their eyes as much as you can. And then the second thing is match your communication style to their communication style.
Right.
I went from a boss who read white papers and had long conversations to a boss who did bullet points and point at it. And I had to adapt my communication. So adapt your communication style to the person you're managing. Those are my two best pieces of advice.
All right. Another question. Can you elaborate on what it means to be mentally done?
When I feel like libraries are my calling, like they're an embodiment of me. And I think 2 times in my career I've realized I've been mentally done. And it was when I had gone through a significant period of time and I realized it was just a job. That I was missing that I am passionately embedded in what I am doing. And it happened twice, where I just had this moment of realization of said, I'm no longer passionate about what I'm doing. I am doing a job. And that's kind of, and I think with that, I had stopped investing my whole self in the job. And that's where I felt like I was falling short and not fulfilling my promise to the organization.
I love your honesty, by the way. I would never get up in front of a room of people in the state and admit to something like that. So
I hope I'm not going to regret it now. Now you're scaring me.
That's great. Okay, and then, last question here. Since other than schooling, what kind of job advice would you give to someone who's wanting to work their way up from a page position, which it sounds like you did?
I did. Be flexible and be open to opportunities, even if on the surface they don't sound like a move up. An opportunity to do something new, even if it doesn't sound like it's a step up the ladder, you never know, it's going to give you some skills. You started by talking about connections, and some of the connections I made that were more valuable were doing things like helping at an event, handing out name tags. We need help at this event. We need handing out name tags. Well, you could think of that as, well, that's a menial task. Like, why would I want to go expend my effort doing that? Something like that, you're going to bump elbows with people. You're going to meet them. You're going to chat with them. And you never know where that's going to lead. So being open to those offers of new tasks and be really flexible as to what a job can be. I think that in a crisis, it was the person who held up their job description to me and said, where does it say that I was least likely to consider for a leadership opportunity, versus the person who would come and go, I see the vision, I see what's needed, tell me how I can help. So those are kind of things I would consider.
All right. Well, it looks like we're kind of up against time, but there's a webcam here, webcam here, webcam here. Hillary Thayer, you got the last word. What do you want to tell the library community out there?
I think last word is to tell you, I have been through at least 3 times when people said libraries were done. When I went to library school, we had a conversation with our advisor right off the bat, and people asked, am I about to waste 2 years of my life? our library's done. And she went, no, they're not. They're going to come back. And they did. And then we went through the internet. The internet's going to kill libraries. Well, no, it didn't. We went through big box bookstores. Anybody remember Borders? Out of business Borders? Well, it was going to kill libraries, right? It didn't. We're still here. We are still going to be here. I have complete faith libraries are going to come through this. We may come through this change for the better in many ways. The virtual programming, the ability to do outreach, our political positioning. I have complete faith, and I think you should too.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Hillary. I really appreciate you, well, just coming out and talking to the library community. And I learned a lot more about you as well. Fascinating. And I really admire your honesty as well. And so, last thing is next Thursday at 3 o'clock, we're going to have a virtual tea with Michelle Pereira. And one thing we're going to focus on, and I think maybe Hillary, you've been a part of these conversations, is what's it going to look like when libraries start to reopen. And Michelle is going to talk a little bit about at least her thought process for what's going to happen with Pasadena, and how that's all going to happen, what it's going to look like, some things that maybe we need to be thinking about as before libraries reopen. And that's going to be kind of the gist of our conversation, but it should be interesting to talk to Michelle. And then on next Friday, Patty Wong is going to be doing one of these webinars as well at 1 o'clock, the director of the Santa Monica Public Library and the newly elected CLA President. So again, we've got 2 of them going on next week. So I hope you can join us. Be looking for an email that will have the evaluation of this program. And then also there will be a link if you want to see Hillary again. Well, then this program has been archived. If people miss this one, you can say, hey, you need to watch the interview with Hillary Thayer. So again, I thank you all. Everyone stay safe and take care of each other. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks, Hillary. That went really well, Hillary. Thank you so much.